Well, welcome back, folks. It's chapter 5, and we're on Wednesday's lessons today. Keep up with your reading. But we're going to do something a little bit different today. Instead of looking at the PowerPoint slides, I want you to take a look at the movie that I have incorporated into Moodle, which talks about Iger, the CEO of Disney. And I want you to take a look at the challenges he had to face when he came into Disney. Disney has always been a tremendous company, and it's always been one of the models that most business schools look at in regards to management practices, leadership, and so forth. But Iger had a distinct challenge in being able to, or having to be able to, bring about some people who were not working with Disney as well. He had to look at some confrontations and so forth. So Iger had some 10 principles that he talks about in his interview here. And I want you to take a look at that today, and we'll discuss some of this on the forum or in the forum, and then we'll move on from there. Make sure, again, that you keep up with your reading, but this reading today should deal with systems approach, and we talked about that fairly comprehensively yesterday. So let's take a look at the CEO of Disney and see how he leads and his philosophy on leadership.
Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Mr. Robert Iger.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, very, very much. And welcome, everyone. Welcome, Bob, and congratulations. It's a wonderful honor tonight. And
Thank you.
The people who are chosen for the John Wooden Global Leadership Award are chosen because they embody the wonderful values-based leadership of John Wooden. And we are very, very proud to have you. Another reason that we need to give Bob and the Disney cast members a big round of applause is that they are probably the company with the single largest concentration of Disney employees who are alums of Anderson, 125 at this moment in time. So yay.
Great, thank you. Where does the line form for jobs?
Don't ask. How many people are currently at Disney, have interned at Disney, or are going to Disney? Wow, that's quite a crowd. And how many people have ever been cast members at Disney? Okay.
How about ride operators?
Right. And we won't ask how many of you have not visited a Disneyland. Probably no one.
I'm curious about that.
Has anyone not visited Disneyland? Wow, you are deprived. Seriously, we got to fix that.
I can give you directions. So you can use MapQuest, actually.
So the format for today is we received an unbelievable number of questions from the students and from others. So I've folded them into the questions I'll ask, and I'll every now and again identify a student who asked that question. But I'm going to handle all of the questions to maximize the time with Bob in the period that we have. And of course, we all recognize that Bob's a highly visible CEO of a public corporation. So please don't record. And of course, we are mindful of the care that he has to take in making statements. So you've been head of one of the largest companies in the world, certainly the largest entertainment companies in the world since 2005. When you took over, it wasn't exactly smooth times for Disney, and yet under your leadership, the company has soared. The market cap is $125 billion, double what it was a couple years ago. The company has risen, the company stock has risen about 40% in the last year. This is an amazing success story, and I'd love for you to trace for us the path that you took from then to now in turning the company around and achieving those results.
Well, in 2005, when I became CEO, we had been through a really, really rough period of time. And we were kind of at war in many respects with a variety of different entities. And I was fortunate in that the perception of the company was probably more negative than the company deserved. So the company that I inherited, while it appeared on the outside to be, if not broken, in trouble, on the inside it was on much more solid footing than I think the world or those that were being critical or skeptical about, or pessimistic about the company believed. So I wasn't handed a bad hand, per se, but there were issues I had to deal with. First and foremost, I needed peace and prosperity, as I called it. I needed to basically focus on the areas that were the most controversial and the entities we were having the most difficulty with. For instance, our distributors, the distributors of our channels would be one example of that. We had some shareholder issues, we had some board member issues, we had issues. And so I first focused on basically reaching peace agreements with those entities, doing some negotiating and basically being a politician more than anything else. I also quickly determined, although I had been COO for 5 years, I had a good finger on the pulse of the company, that the company had stopped believing in itself. It was pessimistic about its own future. And that's critical because I talk often about wanting to be among the most admired companies in the world. You have to start with your own employee base. You want to be admired by your customers and you want to be admired by your shareholders eventually, but unless you're admired by the people who work for you, you're not going to get the other. So I started really, after making peace, with really proselytizing and explaining to the company that its future was much brighter and showing the way, because one of the things a CEO has to do is you're kind of the motivator in chief, and not only can you have to act the part of a cheerleader, but you have to actually, there has to be substance to what you're cheering about. So I spent a lot of time focused on what our future could be and why we really needed to be more optimistic. I then made a couple of very quick moves that put basically jet fuel into our tanks, which weren't empty, but they needed definitely topping off. One was a deal that I made with Steve Jobs and Apple to move our product onto the then just iTunes platform, which was really starting to take off. There was a lot of heat behind it. And that kind of showed people that we were willing to take risks, we were willing to challenge our own business models, we were willing to embrace technology and not try to fight it. And there was a partner out there, Steve Jobs and Apple, that was willing to be in business with us, which sent a very loud signal to the company itself that
And to the world.
maybe we were back. And then through that relationship acquired Pixar for $7.3 billion, which was a rather large acquisition for a very new CEO. But among the entities we were at war with was Pixar. And they had formed the heart and soul of our animation division, which in many respects has been the heart and soul of the company. And we had been through a 10-year period where the animation we were making was not up to the quality we needed, and the animation Pixar was making through its partnership with us was fantastic. So by buying them, that really went a long way to not just reigniting a business animation that was very critical to the company, but showing the company that we were much more open, we were much more willing to embrace outside entities, and we maybe could get our mojo back, so to speak. So steps like that. The three strategic priorities that were mentioned in the introduction of me: make great product, use technology in very compelling ways, I can explain that, and grow globally, I basically articulated right away. And as recently as last week when I met with 275 top managers of the company, I'm still articulating that, still talking about it. So focusing on strategy was also very, very important. It's a combination of things, but those all were great contributors.
So there's enough follow-up here to fill the day, but I'll start with just maybe the acquisitions that you made. You talked about the Pixar acquisition, you then made the Marvel, and then later, just last year, the Lucasfilm acquisition. Talk about what each of them represented strategically to you, and you mentioned the Pixar in the context of revitalizing animation at Disney. The others, and how that has paid off, not just in their lines of business, but across Disney.
Mm-hmm. There are different reasons for all three acquisitions, but there's also a lot of commonality. The primary strategic thrust of the company is make high-quality branded entertainment. I talked earlier about, so all three fit into that category. I talked earlier about animation. As animation goes, so goes the company. It was founded by Walt Disney, who was an animator, created Mickey Mouse 85 years ago, or introduced Mickey Mouse 85 years ago Monday as Steamboat Willie. Created all the value of the company from his early animation, leading up to the first animated feature, which was Snow White in 1937, all the way through the 60s when he died. And animation of the company has driven so much more value because of what we've been able to do with it across consumer products and publishing, games, toys, etc., theme park attractions, music, stage plays, television shows, just about anything that moves at the company except ESPN. We don't rely on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or the princesses at ESPN.
But you probably have animation technology and the
We
circus.
share technology,
Yeah?
yes. So Pixar was about fixing a business that was broken, and in fact, a business that was more core to the company than any other business we were in. And I didn't think my tenure as CEO was going to last very long unless I figured out how to turn Disney Animation around. I had three choices. One was stay with the people who were running it, which was risky because they hadn't yet proven that they were capable. Find other people to do it, and I couldn't quite identify whom they might be, or buy Pixar. That's what I said to the board in my first meeting with them. They thought I was out of my mind. I said, the problem is it's not for sale, and if it were, it would be very expensive. And I was surprised that they, while they thought I was a little bit crazy, they at least said, why don't you explore it? I then called Steve Jobs the next day and said, I got a crazy idea. Can I come see you? So Pixar was about really pushing a core strategy, but fixing a very, very vital business. Marvel was more in line with high-quality branded content and content that is leverageable or exploitable across multiple businesses as well. When we look at these properties, we don't just look at them as movies or TV shows. We look at them as properties that can exist in so many different Disney businesses, as I cited earlier. You can check all the boxes with Marvel. We're building an Iron Man attraction in Hong Kong, at Hong Kong Disneyland right now, for instance. Lucas, kind of a similar thing. We had a relationship with George with Star Tours attractions at multiple parks around the world, and Indiana Jones in a few of our parks. He owned Lucasfilm 100%. There were no other shareholders. There was no debt. And as he looked ahead at a life that was full, but wasn't necessarily going to last forever, he was trying to figure out where the entity that was so much his life should rest once he goes, and he told me there was no better place than Disney. Having done Pixar and Marvel and being already successful at those acquisitions, I think he respected the fact that we could bring Lucas into the company, continue to honor and respect his legacy, and basically make sure it was in good hands. And so because it too fit the strategy so perfectly with high quality branded content, it was kind of a no-brainer for us, even though it cost just over $4 billion. And again, product that if you make a great film, actually there hasn't been a Star Wars film in a while, and yet it is still the #1 franchise in the world for consumer products, for licensed merchandise. If you look at Lego's business is driven to a large extent on its Star Wars license agreement, as a for instance. So there was, again, something we had already fit into the parks. There was all kinds of expansion possibilities, and we're developing those right now. But we're going to release a movie in December of 2015, which will be the first Star Wars film in a while. And from that, we believe, will be much more. But also before that, there'll be more. We're developing a TV series already, and there's a lot of other work going on.
Let's take a moment to talk about leadership. And how do you think of the leadership ideal? And then how do you fit your priorities as a CEO into that vision? And maybe also extend it to the personal priorities that you have.
Well, first of all, I think you have to define what a CEO's role is. I believe the CEO has to define what the company is. In our case, we decided we are a content company. We're not a distributor, for instance. We make things. We don't distribute them. There is some distribution, but the primary thrust is creation. A CEO also has to define strategies. I talked about the three primary strategies. There is a fourth, which is diversity, which I'll talk about as it relates to leadership. And then a CEO has to set standards, which essentially is standards for your product and for your people. It's about quality, it's about integrity, and make sure that the company is adhering to those standards. And then lastly, a CEO is the motivator in chief, which I talked about earlier. So by defining what my job is, I think then you have to I have to figure out, okay, what attributes from a leadership perspective will enable me to carry out that job best, and which attributes are those that my leadership team needs to either learn or be the best at in order for the company to continue to flourish. And I named in my speech to my management team last week, I talked about what do you do with a company that is great already, and it is, and I know that I sound conceited when I say that, but if you look at any way the company is to be measured, whether it's admiration, respect, we show up on a lot of lists in that regard as among the most admired in the world, or the bottom line, or just the love that people have of the company and its products, I think we've already achieved a lot. But how do you take a company that has achieved so much and achieve even more? What's the ingredient to being even better at being great? And it really comes down to leadership. It comes down to basically a number of attributes that I think enable companies not only to continue to do what they do well, but to continue to improve. And so there are 10 that are on my mind. These are things that I have determined are important from my 40 years of experience in the business and having learned from working for some great people. I've had the luxury of having some great bosses. I see if I can remember all 10. I brought my iPad in case I have to refer to it. I started with optimism. I know that sounds odd, but leaders have to be optimistic. Nobody wants to follow a pessimist. The face that you put on when you face your people needs to be a face that is positive about the future of the company, about their future in the company. You can be skeptical, you can be realistic, but you can't be cynical and you can't be pessimistic. Nobody would follow you otherwise. Leaders also have to be thoughtful. Thoughtfulness is an often underappreciated quality of leadership. What that means is you have to take the time to study. You have to know the subject matter, the facts, the issues that you're dealing with, so that when you render an opinion as a leader or make a decision, it's made based on knowledge. And when you do that, one, I think typically your decision is going to be right. Secondly, it will be listened to, adhered to, respected more. You're not just shooting from the hip or doing something off the cuff. At the same time, you have to be decisive. People hate to work for people who are not decisive. With that, you also have to be focused. People need to know what's important to you, what's important to the company, what are the things they should be focused on. Really important. I believe in being open, honest, even in terms of how you deal with people, accessible. Those all kind of fit into the category of fairness and just how you interact and how you treat people.
We're up to 5, I think.
Curiosity, extremely, I don't think I'll get them all. Curiosity, extremely important. You need to really want to learn about new things. Your company is being challenged, particularly in today's world where change is not only a constant, but it's happening in such pervasive, rapid ways that you've got to be curious. You've got to learn about all the shifting of the plates and et cetera and so on. You must listen to a diversity of opinions, and to do that, you have to surround yourself with a diversity of people. That's really critical.
That's close.
I just mentioned a bunch.
Yeah, it's close. It's close. By the way, I'll put a plug out here to UCLA. UCLA's new campaign is about UCLA, the community of optimists. It's about the future.
That's coincidental.
Yeah, about the future. Coincidental.
Well, it's important. If you go into somebody's office, I think of one of our characters. I won't make too many character references, but Eeyore, which is the Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore. If your boss is Eeyore, oh my goodness. You want to leave. You really want to work for somebody like that? Oh, bother, you know.
Yeah. Right. So you talked about the love that people have for Disney, and that's a beautiful thing. You have many global brands that have been around for maybe not 90 years of Disney's existence, but for many, many decades. And it's not just that they're strong brands. The consumers have an emotional connection to them. And these are two questions. This is a question from actually two students, from Bhavna, second year. Bhavna, I think I saw her. There you are, Bhavna. And then Michael Weldon, who's a third year FEMBA. Actually, he's a Disney Imagineer. And the question that they asked is, with this length of tradition, with this kind of emotional connection, how do you disrupt? How do you change? How do you innovate without violating that great tradition and the great connections that your consumers have?
Those are great questions, because one of the hardest things for companies that have achieved success is how do you continue to not only be successful but be relevant? How do you maintain relevance to a brand that was created in 1923? It's almost impossible in today's world. And if you look at the brands, the great brands of the world in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, you can go into the 80s and the 90s, there aren't many that are still on the list. Coca-Cola, by the way, is one of them. But today's great brands didn't really even exist, certainly not in the 20s, in some cases not in the 70s. Apple, a good example of that. Amazon, another good example of that. Google, another great example of that. These are some of the great brands in the world. So I marvel, at the, no pun intended, at the fact that Disney is still relevant. So how do we do that? And I think it's done a number of ways. One, when you have a great brand, there's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of heritage, there's a lot of legacy. Great to have all those things, rather have them than not have them. You can't let them get in the way of innovation. Frequently what happens at companies like this, starting from the top, is the guy who's running the company or the woman reveres the brand. It is sacred. The brand is sacred. If you revere a brand, you might as well stick it in a museum behind glass and not touch it. The world is changing around it. The brand is staying the same. That's ridiculous. You have to evolve. So I talk a lot about balancing the need to respect the heritage and continue to innovate, not revere the heritage. There's a difference. Understand the values, understand what contributed to the great success. In Disney's case, things that are good for my family, things that make me laugh, things that are inclusive. There's a universal appeal to what we make. Optimism, looking at the world really with, a sense of the possible, for instance. All those qualities, that's what made Disney great. It's what made Walt Disney great. It's what made Mickey Mouse great in many respects. Let's continue to bring those values forward, but let's apply them in different ways, and let's recognize that the body maybe that they fit in, or the storytelling that they fit in, or the way that people gain access to those stories necessarily have to change. So there's a lot of that. The other thing that is important is you have to continue to challenge yourselves. The world is throwing a lot of challenge at you. Your business models are under, complete and total disruption from a variety of things. Disrupt yourself. If you don't disrupt yourselves, you're going to be disrupted anyway, and you'll usually end up trying to catch up. So right now, just think about how we access storytelling, good example, or media, in so many different ways. It's doesn't have to be in your home anymore, in front of a fixed screen on a wall. It can be anywhere. So let's put our stuff anywhere or everywhere. Companies often don't think about that, because they think, well, we're gaining the most money or revenue because we distribute it one way. If we do it the other way, we'll either alienate those that are distributing it, or we'll create havoc with our own business model. We don't want that. Well, the business model's got to change. So the deal we made with iTunes was a good example of that. Let's disrupt ourselves. And showing that to the people of the company that willingness to do that, that then, I think, stimulates them. It gives them the wherewithal to continue to do the same thing.
So just to follow up on that, I mean, it's not just the heritage that is to be respected. You also have the scale issue that tends to be inversely associated with innovation. 170,000 employees. And I've heard you talk about insurgency in the company. How do you get it to the micro level, to the employee level, that they have the willingness and the confidence to be risk takers and disruptors?
Well, first of all, and one of the things I didn't mention in terms of leadership is you have to lead by example. I like to talk about self-regulation and setting standards and adhering to those standards, but you also have to show people the way by you doing it too. So challenging the status quo, I do all the time. I show a willingness to basically say, yes, that's an important business model, and I'd love to perpetuate it, or protect it in some way. But we're going to fail if we try to do that because it's getting chipped away at already. So let's challenge it ourselves. So it starts there, and then you have to demand that of the people who work for you directly. I have a dozen direct reports. We talk about this all the time. Let's continue to challenge ourselves, and they do it to their people, and so on, and so on, and so on, and it trickles down. Great leaders are great communicators, or successful leaders are great communicators. You have to communicate all the time. I have great people who also keep reminding me of that too. One of them is sitting in front of us, Zenya Muka, who is my head of corporate communications. She's telling me all the time, you got to get your message, continue to get your messaging out. I say to her, I've said that 8,000 times. She said, say it again. Then, because one of the things that she pointed out to me recently is when you keep saying it, they say it. They're all saying it.
Right.
I've been to places, I visit offices around the world. I was at one of our offices fairly recently, in Tokyo. And we have a team in Tokyo led by a country manager. He's got his own executive team. And they brought out cards, their business cards. Each business card had my strategic priorities on the back of it. I'm going to charge them for that, by the way.
Smart move.
But I thought, wow, okay, that's great. They're listening. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of communication.
So let's go global. You talked about Tokyo. That's been a big preoccupation of yours even before you became CEO, because you ran international for Disney. And you're, I think, vice chair of the U.S.-China Business Council, where the word on the current business climate in China is viewed as with tempered optimism. You're opening Shanghai Disneyland. You're opening the biggest Disney store, I think, in the world, in Shanghai. How do you see the opportunities in China, the challenges, and there are some challenges, and then also going elsewhere in some emerging growth opportunities for Disney?
I'm smiling because I like to say to people sometimes, follow the babies. Where is their population growth? Whenever, by the way, someone we know has a baby, and I send them usually a Disney basket of things, it's kind of easy to choose from. Yes. I write them a note saying, thank you for supporting one of our most important strategic priorities, having babies. Yeah. So we look a lot at demographics, and you look at the United States and Western Europe and Japan, you see very low or negative birth rates, for instance. And while we like parents and grandparents too, at some point you're going to run out of kids, or
so you're happy about the new child policy in China?
They're fantastic. I've been lobbying for that for a long time. So we look at demographics. I was in Turkey about a year ago. You look at the population of Turkey. It's a very young country. And I was actually staggered by the number of people in Turkey under 14, bigger than France, bigger than Italy, bigger than Spain, bigger than Germany, Turkey. So that's an obvious one. Then, of course, you add on to that all kinds of other development, economic, cultural, technological development, also very important, a regulatory environment that's hospitable. That's not always the case. China, that's actually one of the more challenges there. But we basically look at the emergence of basically young populations, growing middle class, more spendable income, stability politically and economically, although that becomes harder too. The U.S., while still a great market for this company and a growth market for this company, is not going to power the company forever. And we have opportunities to grow elsewhere, and we've tried to pursue them very, very aggressively. So we bought the largest movie producer in India. We bought an over-the-air network and converted it to a Disney Channel in Russia. We broke ground on Shanghai Disneyland, which you mentioned a few years ago, and we're planning to open in late 2015 and we're building a Disney store. We launched the Disney Channel in Turkey. We now have a Turkish Disney team. Latin America has, I think, doubled in terms of the bottom line at the company in the last 5 years. Huge growth in Brazil. Mexico has been a great market for us as well. We're starting to look now. We just opened up a larger office for greater presence in Southeast Asia. We look at the Philippines. We look at Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. These are all countries that we think long-term, in some cases longer term, are potentially great Disney markets. One other thing that's interesting, talking all the way back, about those brands, is if we say Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, you say Spider-Man, Iron Man, whatever, in some of these markets, they're known. So we have, in a way, not quite an invitation to enter the market from the people. Then they want us, they know us. Then you have to contend with all the other issues.
So I'll ask you about a couple of the other issues, but the more general question is how generalizable is a single strategy versus Shanghai Disneyland or Paris Disneyland? How different are they?
That's the hardest thing. I can get specific about theme parks, but no two markets are the same, and therefore we enter each market differently. As if, for instance, in India, we have now 9 TV channels, but television channel, it's different there. A lot of people have access to multi-channel TV, but they don't pay for it. So getting paid somewhat, subscription fees, somewhat difficult. We're paid somewhat. And advertising is just starting to grow. But what we really wanted to do there is grow the brand. The movie business in India is huge, one of the biggest movie markets in the world. We decided we needed to enter it at a much higher level because it was all about local. It wasn't about making a movie here, there are also 23 languages spoken in India, sticking a local language track on it and basically wishing for success was about making Disney movies there. We do both. We export to India, but that's why we bought the movie company, to really grow the Disney brand and have it feel like it is an Indian Disney company. In Russia, it was about TV, so we bought the TV network. We're not going to build a theme park in Russia. Although one of the biggest markets for growth from the movie industry, Disney and the industry, is Russia, mostly because of growth of multiplex movie screens. In China, regulation prevented us from a channel, prevents us from having branded blocks on Chinese TV. Retail was a possibility. Movies has grown also. Actually, Thor is out now, and it's one of the biggest markets for us, China. But there have been restrictions on the number of international or foreign movies coming into China. And so we thought that the best way to go into China was to plant the biggest flag that we could, which is a theme park. What's great about a theme park is that it's a big kind of living and breathing, basically model of your brand. And you can experience the Disney brand in so much more immersive ways. That's the good news. The bad news is that in a country of 1,300,000,000 people, hopefully in the first year of Disneyland Shanghai, only about 10 million people will go. So it's still small. But like what happened in the United States in the 50s, it becomes an aspirational experience, an aspirational brand. Kids growing up, I grew up in the United States in the 50s, dreaming one day of going to Disneyland. That's what we'd like to happen in China. And so we intend to, and we had a willing partner in the Chinese government, who's been great, by the way. It took a long time to negotiate a very, very complex deal. But in the end, they felt good for China. We're going to create a huge number of jobs in a great market, Shanghai. And so they've been very willing partners. And we believe that it is probably the best way we could grow the brand in what is a huge, but challenged market because of the regulatory environment.
I want to switch now to technology, and we talked a little bit about the iTunes deal that you made with Steve Jobs, which was certainly not just a disruptor for Disney, but a disruptor across the entire industry as a first. But technology has changed, is changing, and will radically change all facets of your business, from the production of movies to the distribution to the business model, video streaming, the role of Netflix. How do you think across all of your businesses about technology, the opportunities it presents, and the risks?
Well, I think the biggest risk is disruption of the business model, but there's also another form of disruption, which is changing the aspects of what you create, which essentially is changing tastes. I'll get to that first because it's actually been on my mind a lot lately. What I mean by that is, like, today, there's a huge growth in people's interest in very, very compressed, condensed video experiences. You know of things like Vine, but BuzzFeed is a good example of that. Things that are short, things that are brief. I actually joked recently about shorts. We make animated shorts, and in Walt Disney, when he made Mickey Mouse shorts, they are 8 minutes long. If we show them today, they're like a mini-series. So we decided that we'd make new ones, and this is a couple of years ago. I commissioned 25 new Mickey shorts. They were 3 minutes long. I just looked at a few of them. They felt like mini-series to me. They felt, when we looked at 8 minutes, we said, no, we got to go 3. Now I'm thinking, maybe they need to be, 30 seconds, a minute. So I think a lot of that has to do with technology. Some of it is just giving people access to new forms of content. Some of it is giving people the tools to create new forms of content. Some of it is just giving people so much more choice that in order to consume more choice, they're consuming shorter things, because longer things take more time. So that's, I think, an interesting dynamic. And that is going to put it already is, a lot of pressure on storytellers to tell stories more economically. It doesn't mean movies are going away or the hour TV show is going away, but I think we need to be mindful of that. Where we were with technology before we started thinking about needing to create really different experiences was use technology first to make things better, 3D, high definition, multi-camera sports coverage, all those things. Use it to distribute much more ubiquitously. Use the iTunes platform, for instance, go mobile, very, very important. Use technology to get closer to the customer. That's also growing in importance. Collecting data, creating experiences that are personalized or customized that are more relevant, and then obviously leveraging that from a financial perspective. And then lastly, use technology to be more efficient. So I think about it in all those ways, all very compelling ways, and all essential for the company's health and ability to grow. But some of the things I mentioned earlier, there's far more competition today than ever before. Who would have thought, when I was programming ABC in the late 80s and early 90s and putting programs on like Full House and Family Matters, and I'm ancient, by the way, I wasn't thinking about House of Cards on Netflix.
Exactly.
I remember when Fox came along, and then I have to start worrying about HBO going into original programming. But now, it's everywhere. Or, the 30-second YouTube clip or whatever, or Vivo, or you name it, it's out there. So that's, I think, huge disruptive effect.
Well, and you talked about technology. Of course, it's technology interacting with the millennial generation that consumes information in 30-second bites.
So by the way, going all the way back to optimist versus pessimist, one of the things that I felt was important to that is look at technology as opportunity, not as threat. Because if you look at it as threat, everybody's going to think you're only under threat, and they will try to ward it off or hold it back or not embrace it. If you look at it as opportunity, which is optimistic, admittedly, people will start embracing it and taking it and using it to create opportunity, as opposed to trying to basically prevent it from happening, which is an impossibility.
And how does that change the business model of advertisers?
Well, I think among the threats that we're facing, or among the disruptions, is the whole value of and the future of what I'll call the electronic advertisement. Well, one is, will it be consumed as much as it needs to be to create the value that we need to support all the programming or the content? Are there better ways to deliver it? Are there better ways to deliver messaging? One of the things that's more and more clear is we have to start really turning to what I'll call dynamic ad insertion, which is collecting user data. You see this all the time in your web and your mobile experiences, learning more about people. I noticed today I was on a website, and there was an ad on the website for James Purse clothing, and I had bought, not all that long ago, on my computer, something from that store, and I was seeing James Purse ads on the site. I know that it wasn't an accident. No. But what was good about that is I immediately saw it, and it was a brand that I consume, that was of interest to me. I didn't buy any T-shirts today or anything, but I think it's important to start collecting user data and creating brand and creating relevance in terms of advertising. That's pretty damn, and using dynamic ad insertion, which is basically not a one-size-fits-all. Don't put a commercial in a show like Scandal on ABC that goes to the whole country, but learn more and more about consumers. Now, that's not easy when you start talking about mass media. It takes technology to do that, but the technology exists today, and it's becoming much more robust that will enable us to do more of that.
So this is a perfect segue to MBAs, because I think MBAs are brilliant at those data analytic questions and answers that you need to fine-tune the consumer base that you're talking to. And so I'm an optimist, and I think that entertainment companies are going to see the light and start hiring tons and tons of MBAs. But they haven't done so as much in the past, unlike Disney. So what do you think the role of MBAs could be and should be in entertainment companies, in large global entertainment companies, especially for a school like ours, which has a significant interest of our MBAs in that industry?
Well, I think there are multiple roles. Companies today need to really be ambidextrous. They need to be able to, and people need to be that. I find this true for myself, by the way, where there are days. Yesterday was a day I screened a movie with the creative team at our studio, and we gave notes at the end of it, which is essentially just reacting to what we were shown to try to make it better. And then I moved from that into a meeting about data-driven advertising, and I moved from that to a meeting about health and pension benefits.
Oh.
And I then moved from that to something that is some shareholder-related thing, and then I had a quick meeting on some technology that we're using in our parks to get closer to our customers. So, I know that my job requires me to have both a deep understanding and appreciation of business and technology, while at the same time, I'm not a creator, but I manage a lot of creative processes, and the people who work for me do. I need to have an appreciation for creativity, not just its value to the company, but enough of an appreciation so that I can render an opinion about it. Sometimes it's sort of a last resort, meaning I'm the last person to see something before it goes out the door. And I like every once in a while to get a shot at something that's big and important, just so that if something was missed by the people who work for me because they're so close to it, I'd like to at least be able to give a little more perspective. So what an MBA brings to our company, and we do have many, is broad perspective. It can, depending on the background of the person, it can round someone's background out. I also like working with people that have both a business sense and a creative sense. Even on the legal side, we have a general counsel who's a business person first and a lawyer second. Does he apply his legal background and his opinions about the law to a lot of his decisions? Yes, but he thinks about how they fit into a business structure and our strategy. And I think the same thing can be true between creative executives and business executives.
That was actually a question from one of our first-year students, Farzan Gari, who was asking, how do you indeed bridge the, quote, divide between the creators, the creative side, and the business side, so that you have the artistic product at the extreme, and at the same time, don't lose sight of the business results?
Yeah, one of the things that we're trying to do with the company in terms of cultivating a next generation of talent that could either replace me or replace the people who work for me is developing people that have both a business and a creative sensibility. Again, I don't need someone in a job working for me that has ever made a movie, but for instance at the studio, but they need to know good from bad. In fact, the Alan Horn, who runs our studio, has an MBA, interestingly enough.
There you go.
And he knows a great movie from a bad one, but he also knows the impact of business and the business elements of running what is a huge division of the company. Same thing with the person who runs our parks and resorts. He has an MBA. And there too, he knows a good ride from a bad, but the business components of that division are so huge. And so actually the same thing is true for consumer products at our company. Head of Interactive has a law degree. Think through the person who runs our media networks, ESPN, ABC, Disney channels. They have graduate degrees, but I don't think they have MBAs.
Teacher, one of them is a teacher.
Well, Ann Sweeney has a graduate degree in teaching, that's right.
Here's another question from one of
I
us.
don't, by the way.
And you've done okay.
My graduate degree is in working.
Well, and this takes us to the question that Aaron Marks asked. He's a second-year Femba. And he said, you know, you have worked for a long time at Disney, several decades, versus us, and I'm going to quote
I
because
feel very old. You've worked for a long time, several decades.
well, you're is it 30 years young at Disney?
40, it'll be 40 years in 2014.
You were robbed from the cradle, no doubt.
Still trying to figure out who's going to give me my 40-year trophy.
Yeah.
We get statues at the big anniversaries. In fact, tomorrow night we have a dinner in LA. We call it our Service Awards. And we recognize 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm giving an award out, a statue out tomorrow to someone who's worked for us for 60 years.
Oh my gosh.
That's a statue. I think maybe it's a Tesla. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Right.
But yes, I've been, so we have to figure out who's going to give me my 40th.
We can't resurrect Walt.
No, can't.
Should have.
Walt's gone.
But this is a question from Aaron, which I think is quite interesting, and I'm going to quote it, that what's your advice to our perhaps, this is ours being Aaron's, our perhaps overly ambitious and professionally impatient generation, we're more likely to jump from job to job or company to company rather than waiting it out. Is that reasonable in light of the job opportunities and the more stagnant economy today?
You know, we all have a tendency to, I think, apply our own personal experiences to opinions particularly about career management. I get asked this a lot by people, both inside the company and out, sort of what's the secret to your success? And I want to speak very specifically about that question because I talk about that a lot, which is really patience and ambition and the balance. When I answer the question, what's the secret to my success, I typically mention working hard, treating people well, and luck, because I've had a lot of luck. But one of the things that has served me extremely well is the ability to be patient. Now, when I talk about that, what I really say is that there's a lot about your career that is actually not controllable by you. In other words, there are outside factors. There are kind of exogenous events that you can't control, external forces. And they can frustrate you a lot, either because they're throwing challenges and bad news at you or because they're throwing no news at you, meaning you're stuck somewhere. You have a feeling that you're stuck. And yeah, it's not because you wanted to be stuck, but there's nothing moving. And you can't make it move unless you move. And that's when people make a lot of really bad mistakes. They get impatient. Either they have a plan for themselves. I remember when I started, everybody wanted to earn their age. That was a big deal. Inflation has changed that. So earning $30,000 when you were 30, that's how far back I go. I achieved that, by the way. But that was a huge deal. And so what happens if you're 30 and you're not making that? You think, well, I have to make that. Or being a vice president in 5 years, or doing this in X amount of time. It's great to have all those ambitions, but frequently they're not going to be fulfilled because you can't control it all. And you have to be careful when that doesn't happen about what your actions or reactions are to that. Sometimes it makes sense to pick yourself up and find something else. Sometimes it's better off just to be patient, because just when you think nothing is going to change or no opportunity is going to come your way, boom, you're smacked in the face with it. So I've been lucky in that, one, I've been at places in my life where I wasn't sure, or I thought maybe I hit a dead end, and suddenly things opened up. But I've also worked for a companies, because we were bought, where the company is so vast and so varied in its businesses that it provided me with a number of change opportunities and growth opportunities over the years. So I've worked in sports, television, and news, and entertainment, and international, and now, of course, at Disney, and theme parks, and animation, and games, and you name it. So I've been blessed with being able to stay really at one company, but still have just a rainbow of opportunities. But I've seen a lot of people make really bad career decisions out of impatience. I was lucky that I stayed where I was, even during times that were pretty frustrating, because change wasn't coming either fast enough for me or in a manner that was consistent with the calendar that I established for myself to achieve.
Well, and we were saying earlier that the only dead-end job that Bob has ever had is the current one.
It is, yes, that's true. It is odd in your life when you get to a job that's a dead end. I can't be promoted anymore.
Not a bad.
And that's kind of depressing, because what do you work for, you know?
So we're running out of time, but I have to ask this question, and this is from Davin Dickow, who's a first-year student. You know, here at UCLA Anderson, we speak about the values of John Anderson and Coach John Wooden and what they mean to us. And I'd love for you to speak about the coach, especially given the award tonight. But I'd also like for you to speak about the legacy of Walt Disney, who founded the company 90 years ago, died almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
What does Coach Wooden and Walt?
Well, it's very interesting for me because I'm 62, I'll be 63, and I had idols growing up. There were people in certainly my formative years, my teens, that I admired a lot. And you know, so if you're growing up, you turn a teenager in the 60s. Walt Disney was one of them. John Wooden was another one. There were others. Martin Luther King certainly would be on that list. Interestingly enough, the Beatles were on that list for completely different reasons. Although they were unbelievable innovators, they challenged the status quo. But Walt Disney and John Wooden shared similarities. First of all, they were optimists. They were perfectionists. They were achievers because they really had ambition and wanted to achieve. But in both cases, I've studied Walt a lot, and I've read more about John Wooden lately, it wasn't victory at all cost. It was victory, you know, won by maintaining integrity, by demanding quality in terms of behavior of people, though, first, and then of product, and then obviously the bottom line. In Wooden's case, victories, but they were really competitors, not of one another, but they had a high competitive spirit. That's really valuable. It's so important to have a strong sort of competitive nature. You know, I've read a lot about John Wooden and the value of teamwork. Certainly that's the case at Disney today. This is a company that is successful because of a team, not because of a CEO. It is a collection of many, many individuals, whether it's the 170,000 cast members or the senior management team or all of the above. And I love John Wooden's respect for teamwork and the understanding that it could never be about an individual. It had to be about a team. And my work experience, my CEO experience has been all about that.
Well, before I thank you, I do want to do one shout out or two shout outs. First of all, to the Disney team. They've worked with us today through the whole evening. Thank you very, very much for all of your partnership. Thank you. And of course, to our team. And then one of the secrets of Bob's success is sitting right here in the audience, and that's Willow Bay, his wife. So thank you, Willow, for being here.
Willow has an MBA too, by
I
the
know.
way. So
She
my wife is well run.
Yeah,
What's that?
And
It's joint property.
Yeah. And we know that you work out every morning at 4:30 in the morning. So we want you to wear
That's
this
sick.
when you.
Oh, that's cool.
When you work out.
I like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is no Mickey Mouse sweatshirt.
No. This is for the heavy duty.
Nice job.
Thank you very,
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
What a nice.
Thank you. Are we off the set?
Well, hopefully today you saw some of the challenges that CEOs and leaders face. It's more than just being able to turn a profit and look at the company's bottom line. There are a lot of entities that a CEO has to be involved in. If they're going to be a good leader, they have to be able to interact and work and navigate within these entities quite effectively. But they also have to be people who can motivate and reconcile and cast a vision and so forth. Think about all that Disney's done and some of the things that he talked about with Pixar and so forth. These are revolutionary ideas that hadn't been thought of in the past. When Michael Eisner was the CEO of Disney, Disney saw some of its worst years under his leadership, but there was little innovation. Think about what Disney is doing today in the movies, in the recreation, amusement park field, and all of the things that they are offering today. We can do well by listening to Iger and some of the strategies that he incorporated. Well, that's enough for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.